A simple stroll down a Manhattan street would suggest that ours is the most genetically variable species on the planet. In fact, though, the human genome is markedly less variable than those of most species for which we have genetic information. Only about 1 in every 1,000 human base pairs varies among individuals. Genetically, then, we are 99.9% alike, a minute degree of difference by the standards of other species. Fruit flies, even if they all look the same to us, have levels of variation some 10 times higher. Even Adelie penguins, those icons of sameness in their vast Antarctic colonies of indistinguishable individuals, are more than twice as variable as we are. Nor is this lack of variability found in our nearer relatives. Chimpanzees are about 3 times as variable as we are, gorillas 2 times, and orangutans 3.5. With the MT, DNA, and Y chromosome family results at hand, it is readily apparent why we humans are so alike. It's because our common ancestor was so recent. 150,000 years is a blink of an eye by evolutionary standards, insufficient time for substantial variation to arise through mutation. Another counterintuitive finding about human variation, what little there may be, is that it does not correlate for the most part with race. Prior to Cannon Wilson's demonstration of humankind's surprisingly recent flight out of Africa, it was assumed that different groups had been isolated from one another on different continents for ages and ages, up to 2 million years. This would have permitted the accumulation of substantial genetic difference, in accordance with the Pauling-Zucker-Kandel model, whereby the extent of genetic divergence between isolated populations is a function of the time over which they have been isolated. In light of Cannon Wilson's conclusion that we all share a much more recent common ancestor, it is clear that there has simply not been time enough for geographically separate populations to diverge significantly. Thus, though genetic differences like skin color are manifest across groups, race-specific genetic differences tend to be very limited. Most of our scant variation is actually spread rather uniformly across populations. One is as likely to find a particular genetic variant in an African population as in a European one. One is left to surmise that much of the genetic variation in our species arose in Africa before the out-of-Africa event, and so was already present in the groups that went forth to colonize the rest of the world. As a final blow to any pride we may take in our own genetic variety, the Human Genome Project's conclusion that only about 2% of our DNA encodes genes would suggest that at least 98% of our variation falls in regions of the genome where it has no effect. And because natural selection very efficiently eliminates mutations that affect functionally important parts of the genome, such as genes, variation accumulates preferentially in non-coding junk regions. The difference between us is small. The difference it makes is even smaller. Because of the short evolutionary timescales involved, most of the consistent differences we do see among groups are probably products of natural selection. Skin color, for one. Under their dense, matted hair, the skin of our closest relatives, the chimpanzee, is largely unpigmented. Chimpanzees, you might say, are white, and presumably the common ancestor of chimpanzees and humans, from which the human lineage spun off 5 million years ago, was similar. And so we infer that the heavy skin pigmentation, characteristic of Africans and of the earliest modern humans in Africa born, arose in the course of subsequent human evolution. With the loss of body hair, pigment became necessary to protect skin cells from the sun's damaging ultraviolet UV radiation. We now know at a molecular level how UV rays can cause skin cancer. They make the thymine bases of the double helix stick to one another, creating a kink, so to speak, in the DNA molecule. When the DNA replicates itself, this kink often promotes the insertion of a wrong base, producing a mutation. If, by chance, that mutation is in a gene that regulates patterns of cell growth, cancer may result. Melanin, the pigment produced by skin cells, reduces UV damage. As anyone with as hopelessly fair a complexion as mine knows too well, sunburn, though typically not lethal, can be a much more immediate health threat than skin cancer. Thus, it is easy to imagine natural selection favoring the acquisition of dark skin in order to prevent not only cancer, but also the infections that can easily result from a severe sunburn. Why did people living in higher latitudes lose melanin? The best explanation involves vitamin D3 synthesis, a process carried out in the skin and requiring UV light. D3 is essential for calcium uptake, which in turn is a critical ingredient of strong bones. A deficiency of D3 can result in rickets and osteoporosis. It is possible that, as our ancestors moved out of Africa into highly seasonal environments with less year-round UV radiation, natural selection favored pale-skinned variants because they, with less sun-blocking pigment in their skin, synthesized D3 more efficiently with the limited UV available. The same logic may apply to the movements of our ancestors within Africa. The San, for instance, in South Africa, where UV intensities are similar to those of the Mediterranean, have a strikingly pale skin. But what about the Inuit peoples who live in or close to the hardly sunny Arctic, but are surprisingly dark? Their opportunities for producing the vitamin would appear to be further limited by the need to be fully clothed all the time in their climate. In fact, the selective pressure favoring lightness seems not to have asserted itself among them, and the reason appears to be that they have solved the D3 problem in their own way. A diet with plenty of fish, a rich source of the essential nutrient. Given what a powerful determinant, mostly for ill, skin color has been in human history and individual experience, it is surprising indeed how little we know about its underlying genetics. This deficit, however, may have less to do with the limitations of our science, and more with the intrusion of politics into science.